Few would argue that the most famous year for vintage guitars is 1959. It was the year that gave us the most coveted and valuable guitar among players and collectors alike, the 1959 Sunburst Gibson Les Paul Standard. In addition to the bursts, as they are now known, 1959 also produced some of the finest iterations of Gibson's ES series and other classic models such as the top-loading rosewood-necked Fender Telecaster. In fact, throughout the 1950s, Gibson and Fender were in their golden age, a period that didn't end until the middle of the following decade. Their workshops were producing instruments of such fine quality that in order to come anywhere close to that level today, both companies have had to set up specialist custom shops. This golden age of the American electric guitar began in the middle of 1950 when Leo Fender launched the Broadcaster, which in 1951 was renamed the Telecaster. 1 year later, in 1952, Fender's rival Gibson introduced the Les Paul model. And just 2 years after that, in 1954, Fender brought out the Stratocaster. So in the space of just 3 years, we had the three models that would go on to rule the solid-body electric guitar market: the Fender Telecaster, the Fender Stratocaster, and the Gibson Les Paul. The golden age did not stop there, however. 1958 saw the introduction of the Gibson ES 335 and the 355, with the ES 345 appearing the following year. Also in 1958 came along the Gibson Explorer and the Gibson Flying V. Ironically, those two radically shaped models found no favour with the guitar-buying public and flopped when first launched. Today, of course, both are highly prized, and the Explorer in particular is seen as the pinnacle of collectible solid-body guitars. This trend of creating iconic instruments continued into the following decade with the introduction of the SG in 1960, initially as the new Les Paul, and the Firebird in 1963. This time is today considered to be the tail end of this classic period for electric guitars. Starting in 1950, the golden age is widely thought to have ended in 1964. So what happened to bring the golden age of American electric guitars to an end? You can probably blame it on the British, and we can narrow down the time it happened to 8 p.m. on February the 9th, 1964. At that momentous point in time, 73 million people in America were sitting down in front of their TV sets to watch the Ed Sullivan Show, where they were about to witness the first live performance in the United States of the Beatles. First of all, Mr. Sullivan referred to a telegram of congratulations to the group sent by Elvis and his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. This was followed by a short ad break, and then Ed made his introduction with the following words: "Now, yesterday and today, our theatre's been jammed with newspapermen and hundreds of photographers from all over the nation, and these veterans agreed with me that this city never has witnessed the excitement stirred by these youngsters from Liverpool who call themselves the Beatles. Now tonight, you're going to twice be entertained by them, right now and again in the second half of our show. Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles, let's bring them on." Just 4 months later, on June the 6th, 1964, the American public tuned in to watch ABC's hour-long variety show, The Hollywood Palace. And here, introduced by host Dean Martin, they got their first sight of the Rolling Stones. The British invasion was now truly underway, and the world of popular music would never be the same again. The Kinks landed in June 1965, the Yardbirds in August 1965, and The Who played their first US concert on the 25th of March 1967. The floodgates were open, and during the next 2 years, America greeted even more British guitar groups, including Cream, Led Zeppelin and Free. A not surprising consequence of all this was the huge number of teenagers who who, inspired by this musical revolution, decided that they themselves wanted to be a Beatle or a Rolling Stone or the next Eric Clapton or Jimmy Page. Or, more accurately, they wanted to create their own waves as the American answer to the British invaders. The most popular instrument for these teenagers to take up was the electric guitar, and this massive upsurge in interest created a demand that needed to be filled. There had been a similar effect in Britain during the previous decade. In 1956, for example, when skiffle music was at the peak of its popularity, sales of guitars went up 5 times in the course of just a year. The trend was already underway in the United States, and the British invasion propelled it to new heights. From annual sales of around 300,000 in 1958, in 1964 over 1 million guitars were sold, and the following year that figure rose to 1.5 million guitars. There were many different brands to choose from, names such as Supro, Harmony, K, Dan Electro, and Silvertone. Inevitably, change was going to happen at 2 of the most prestigious names in American guitar making, Fender and Gibson. To capitalise on the opportunity, they had to move away from a tradition of handcrafted instruments and head towards mass production. On June 5, 1965, a deal was concluded that saw Fender being sold to Columbia Records Distribution Corporation, a subsidiary of Columbia Broadcast Systems, commonly known as CBS, for $13 million. In addition to scaling up production, the company started making physical changes to the instruments. The change from clay dots to pearloid inserts for the dot markers had already happened towards the end of 1964. The changes that followed included a switch in pickguard material from celluloid to ABS and vinyl. And by 1968, the primary finish had gone from the traditional nitrocellulose lacquers to polyurethane. Later changes at Fender included the switch from a 4-bolt neck plate to the 3-bolt plate, heavier bridge and saddle units, and a new style of truss rod that was known as the bullet system. With Gibson, the changes included a switch from nickel to chrome hardware and ending the use of Brazilian rosewood for fingerboards. They also reduced the nut width from 1 11/16 of an inch to 1 9/16. The push to increase productivity paid off because in 1965 Gibson shipped 100,000 guitars. In 1969, the company was bought by Ecuadorian Company Limited. Known then as ECL, the Panama-based conglomerate changed its name later that year to the Norling Corporation. Going into the 1970s, mass production was firmly established at both Gibson and Fender, and today the prices of instruments from the golden age are beyond the reach of most players. With the arrival of the custom shops, however, American guitar manufacturing entered a new period of quality and attention to detail, and today Gibson and Fender go to great lengths to produce exceptionally fine instruments. It's now 60 years since the golden age of American guitars finished, brought to an end thanks to the British invasion.